creepy Reddit stories. The door. It started with a Craigslist ad. Room for rent, $400 month, utilities included. No pets, no loud noises after 10 p.m. I was desperate. My job barely covered my bills, and I couldn't stomach another month of sleeping in my car. The place seemed perfect. Too perfect, honestly. A fully furnished room in a nice neighborhood for $400. I should have questioned it more, but desperation has a way of silencing your instincts. The landlord, Mr. Harlan, was a wiry old man with a stooped posture and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. When he showed me the house, everything seemed normal, except for one thing: the door at the end of the hallway. It was different from the other doors in the house, thicker, with no handle or visible hinges. A faint scratching noise came from behind it, like branches brushing against glass, even though there were no trees near that side of the house. "What's in there?" I asked, pointing at the door. Mr. Harlan's face darkened. "That's not your concern. The rent is cheap for a reason. Don't go near it, don't touch it, and above all, don't listen to it." I should have walked away right then, but I didn't. I moved in the next day. The first few nights were quiet. The house was eerily silent, but I chalked it up to Mr. Harlan being old and reclusive. The door at the end of the hallway didn't bother me much until the fourth night. That was the first time I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was Mr. Harlan talking to someone. But when I crept out of my room, I realized it was coming from the strange door. The whispers were soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby sung in a language I didn't understand. I pressed my ear to the door, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. Then, clear as day, I heard my name, Michael, I stumbled back, heart pounding. I convinced myself I was hearing things, and went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I asked Mr. Harlan about it. He looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. "I told you not to listen," he said. "That room, it's not empty." I pressed him for answers, but he refused to say more. The whispering continued every night, growing louder and more insistent. By the seventh night, it wasn't just whispers. I started hearing knocks, faint at first, but steadily growing louder. It sounded like someone or something was trapped inside, pounding on the door with frantic desperation. "Let me out," a voice begged one night. It sounded like a woman. The next night, it sounded like a child. "Michael, please," it whimpered. "It's so cold." I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My days became a haze of paranoia, and my nights were consumed by the whispers, the knocks, and the voices. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Mr. Harlan left for his weekly grocery trip. Armed with a crowbar, I approached the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers stopped as I got closer, replaced by a low, guttural growl. "Don't," the voice said. It didn't sound human anymore. I hesitated, but something inside me, curiosity, stupidity, or a mix of both, drove me to wedge the crowbar into the edge of the door and pry it open. The moment the door cracked open, the lights in the house flickered and went out. A blast of freezing air hit me, carrying with it a foul stench like rotting meat. Inside the room, there was nothing but darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a suffocating living void that seemed to reach out for me. And then I saw them eyes, dozens of them, red and unblinking, staring at me from the darkness. A hand shot out of the void, long and skeletal, its fingers impossibly long and sharp. It grabbed my wrist, its touch, ice cold and burning at the same time. "Thank you," the voice said, no longer pleading, but triumphant. I screamed and pulled away, slamming the door shut with every ounce of strength I had. The whispers immediately started again, louder and more chaotic, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Mr. Harlan found me huddled in a corner of the living room when he got back. He didn't say anything, just helped me up and handed me a glass of water. "I told you not to listen," he said quietly. I moved out that night, leaving behind all my belongings. A week later, I drove past the house. The windows were boarded up, and a for sale sign was staked in the yard. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear faint whispers coming from the closet, and they know my name. It's just out of sight. As I type this down, I'm too scared to move. I can see it in the reflection. Every time I turn to look at it, it's gone. I don't know what or who it is. All I know is that it's getting closer. It whispers threats to me. I need to get out. I can't see where it is. It's just out of sight. All of this started when I'd decided I needed to get out into nature more. Growing up in Michigan, getting into nature meant going hunting or fishing. My dad and I used to go hunting at every chance we got. It was a perfect combination. He was retired, and I was a homeschool high schooler. We had no schedule to keep to. We would go to the UP for bear hunting, the west side of the state for turkey hunting, and to northeastern Michigan for deer hunting. I really missed that, and I missed my dad. I was born later in life for my parents. My dad was 58 when I was born, and my mother, his second wife, was 36. I used to get made fun of for my parents' age gap. I never thought it was strange. My mom wasn't some 19-year-old dating a 45-year-old. My mom was already in her 30s. When I was born, people assumed my dad was my grandpa. As I grew older, I got tired of trying to explain the situation, so I usually just went along with it. I loved having an older father. He was retired and always had time for me. When I was 19, my mom passed away of uterine cancer, and my dad couldn't handle the grief. He died only a couple years later, a combination of age and grief. As a young man, I immediately had to forego any form of higher education and jump straight into work. I inherited a house that needed to be paid for. I made it work, but it wasn't easy. The idea of having time to go hunting was all but a dream for me now. I always wanted to get back out there. I craved the call of the woods. It's where my dad and I had our best conversations. So this year, 3 years after my father's death, I'd managed to get the time to go out. I'd requested all 40 hours of my vacation time off for opening deer season. So, on November 15th, I headed out to Huron National Forest with my lever-action Marlin 3230, a 2-person tent, my little pit bull mix, Maisie, and my dad's old 2004 Chevy Silverado. I had a week to myself and a deer tag to fill. The day before, my girlfriend Clara came over. She was gonna watch the house while I was gone. We had dinner and went to bed. During the night, she began to talk in her sleep. It was mostly gibberish. She often did this at night, but it was the last thing she said that shook me. "Clara, you're gonna die out there." I sat up and shook her awake. I told her what she had said, and she told me that she had a terrible dream. She said that while I was out hunting, a bear had gotten a hold of me. I assured her that I'd be fine. Michigan black bears are basically giant raccoons. They usually leave people alone as long as your campsite is clean and the food is out of reach. After that, we went back to sleep, and the next morning, I left. I should have listened to her. I should have just hunted behind the house. The next morning at around 5 a.m., I hopped on I-75 and headed north. My lazy Maisie slept the whole way, which was completely normal. The ride was uneventful. I stopped for breakfast at McDonald's and had myself their mediocre breakfast burritos and a hash brown. Maisie woke up only for this, and she happily received a good girl hash brown. When I got to the campsite that I had registered, I let Maisie out, and she gleefully tramped around. She was loving the new smells and sounds that she got to experience for the first time. Then, out of nowhere, she started looking downhill and whimpering. Not like a scared dog, but rather more like a dog who's overly excited. I looked where she was looking and I saw Leon. I'm not stupid. I immediately got us back in the car and drove away. I got on my phone and checked to see if there were any other campsites open for registering. Thankfully there were. I chose one that was another 5 miles into the forest north of the first campsite. I'd watched enough horror movies to know that you don't mess with random forest structures. I'm sure that it was just some fort that was built by some kids who were out on a camping trip with their parents, but after what Clara said, I wasn't taking any chances. Campsite number 2 was much better anyways. It was sitting on top of a hill, so if it rained, I'd remain mostly dry. Maisie liked this site better as well. She was much more relaxed at this campsite. I even had better cell service. I had 3 bars of 4G. Not the best, but I could call and text with a little delay. The first night was mostly just Maisie and I loafing around and recovering from our drive. It was a solid 6 hours from home. It wasn't until that night that things started to get strange. I had lit a fire and was roasting marshmallows over it. I cracked open a couple cans of dog food for Maisie, but she had very little interest. The absolute darkness of the woods was freaking her out. She kept jumping at every tree branch that fell, every raccoon that chittered in the distance, and every other generic forest sounds that you can think of. Then the big one happened. Just out of the reach of the fire's warm glow, off to my left, there was a twig snap. When I jerked my head over to look where the sound emanated from, for a split second, I thought I saw someone. It scared me, but once my eyes adjusted, I realized that it was just an afterimage of the fire. I thought it was crazy how much it looked like a person, but it moved with my eyes, so I wrote it off. Then we crawled into the tent for bed. The next morning, I put the leash on Maisie, sprayed her and myself down with scent-killing spray, and we headed out for the hunt. The fallen leaves were all wet from the previous night's rain and morning dew. Most of the ground was covered with moss as well, so walking without a sound was surprisingly easy. I saw a big tree in the middle of a clearing. I pulled out my binoculars to take a closer look. It was a big old oak tree. The ground beneath it was just loaded with acorns, and there were very distinct buck rubs on the trunk. I decided that this would be a perfect place to set up. We got a little closer to make aiming easier for my peep sight, and we settled in. A few deer walked by, but I didn't want to end my hunting trip on day 1. So I kept waiting for the perfect buck to walk through, even though I had a combination tag. That was when the absolute perfect buck rolled in. He must have been the one who was rubbing the tree. His rack must have had 12 points on it. I pulled up my gun to shoot, but something spooked him, and he bolted out of there. Through my limited vision, as a combination of the low light and the peep sight, I saw something running on all fours, after the buck. It looked like a man on all fours, running like a dog. I pulled out the binoculars again, but by the time I looked through them, it was gone. I looked at Maisie, and she didn't seem bothered. I guessed that it must have been a coyote or something, and that my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. The next couple days only got worse. On my 5th day out, I bagged the buck. It was in fact a 12-point. I field-dressed it, let Maisie snack on some of the more unappealing parts, and dragged it back to camp. Thankfully, I was smart enough to bring my dad's old igloo chest cooler and a sizable chunk of dry ice. After I pieced the deer out, I was putting everything into the cooler. That was when I saw it again. Just over the top of the open cooler hatch, I saw a vaguely human-shaped dart across the clearing. It was maybe 20 IDs away. When I looked up, it was gone. That was enough for me. I'd gotten my deer, I'd enjoyed nature, and nature said, "It's time to go." I loaded everything up and left at around noon. While driving down the 2-track, I looked into the woods and saw a liantu, just like the one I saw the first day. The only difference was that this one was new. Every time I drove past a grove of trees on the way home, I swear I saw someone standing in the trees. Whenever I tried to focus, the figure would be gone. At this point I realized that this wasn't some kind of illusion. I was truly seeing this being. Maybe it was a person. My rationale side said that it must have been, but the fearful side immediately began coming up with supernatural explanations. All I knew for sure was that I was being followed. When I got home, Clara had already gone to work, so I rushed in, locked all the doors, closed all the blinds, and nailed bedsheets and towels to all the windows that didn't have blinds. Every gun I had in the house, a 9mm, a 20 gauge over and under, a 12 gauge pump action, and my 30-30, was then brought into my bedroom. I then called Clara and told her what was happening. "Clara, wait, so someone is stalking you? Me? Someone or something? I'm not sure yet. It's not safe for you here. You just need to go home. I love you, Clara. Why?" I hung up before she could answer. I needed her to stay safe. I thought that my home was safe for me. The locks are solid and the doors are all metal. I was wrong. On night 1 of being home, I heard whispers right outside of my bedroom window. "Creature, you stole from me." "Silence. Creature, give it back to me." I had no idea what it wanted. Was it the deer? I then heard aggressive scratching on the vinyl siding. It sounded like it was trying to dig through the wall. I threw open the blinds, with my 20 gauge drawn. But when I looked out the window, it wasn't there. There wasn't any evidence that anything had been there. No gouges on the siding, or footprints in the snow under my window. Thankfully, I didn't have to go to work the next day. I still had 2 days of vacation left. I just sat in my home listening to the quiet crunching of feet on snow, the whispers, over and over and over. Every now and then, it would test the doorknobs. They would jiggle, and the door frame would shake. For the time being, the doors were holding. At around 7 p.m., I was laying in bed when I heard the front door unlock. Then I heard it open. Then I heard the intruder run into some glass bottles I tied on strings. And I heard the whispers. "Barrett, what the heck? Where are you?" I grabbed my gun, sent up a quick prayer, and slowly opened my bedroom door. "Barrett?" I turned on the flashlight that I had duct taped to the barrel of my shotgun. I screamed and threatened to shoot, but instead of a bent-over creature, I saw Clara. "Clara Barrett. It's me. It's me. Please, just put the gun down." We both began to cry, and I recounted the events of this week. She was hesitant to believe me, but the state I was in caused her to at least be concerned for me and my well-being. She told me to take a shower and that she'd keep watching for me. I thanked her and hopped in the shower. When I got out, I saw that she had brought me my favorite meal from the local Thai joint, spicy drunken noodles. After we ate, I felt so much better. She kissed me and she went to bed. I then took the deer meat and the head back outside. I placed it back in the cooler and left it on the porch. I thought maybe this is what it wanted. That brings us to now. I'm sitting here at my kitchen table, typing this down. Clara forgot to lock the front door, and I fell asleep at the table. I woke up to her massaging my shoulders. Except, I can hear her snoring in my bedroom. The buck's head is sitting on my table looking at me. Maisie is laying on the table. She's been field-dressed and beheaded. In the reflection of their eyes, I can see it. It's just out of sight. Highway 16. I moved to North Dakota 1 year for work, ended up staying 3. I'm from Montana. I would drive back to Montana on my days off every couple weeks. I would get off super late, and mostly would drive at nighttime. A large portion of the 3.5 hours drive are winding two-lane road through pretty uninhabited land. I would see maybe 2 other cars. There was this specific stretch of narrow highway where there wasn't even any houses way off in the distance. The first incident I had was when I was driving back to North Dakota. It was always so very dark. Darker than I ever remember any normal night being. And just for context, I'm open-minded about things but don't just believe everything I hear. Up until this point, I've never really been convinced of anything supernatural or paranormal or demonic. I've had some weird encounters throughout my life, but nothing like the series of events that followed this first night. So, as I was driving along minding my own business, heading back to North Dakota, I hit Highway 16. It's the halfway mark. There's a river next to the road. You follow it a short while. This occurred during the time when I'm driving alongside it. I notice movement out of my peripherals and look to the right where the river is. It's very dark out, but I can see the silver shimmer of the water. Only this time, hovering in the middle of the water, is a super deep thick fog. It's moving, rolling towards the road. Okay, I guess that's normal enough, ... But this wasn't. It wasn't like a haze from moisture, low-hanging. This looked like a single huge thick cloud, a very isolated mass. I could see where it began and where it ended, like it had a shape and was specific to one area, and it moved as a whole. By this time I'm thinking WTF, and am I seeing stuff? So I slow down a little to try to get a better look, because it's so dark and the moonlight is the only thing giving it any illumination. My eyes are fixed on it, and I'm not paying attention to the road in front of me. I'm almost to a hill, where you round a corner and move away from the river, and lose sight of the area I was looking at. I can see the sign warning you to slow down for the corner, reflecting off my headlights, and I look forward to get ready to navigate the turn. I slam on my brakes at 65 miles per hour, hard. There's a massive, hazy, gray-white object in the middle of the road. I literally skid to a stop in the middle of this highway. I can't even explain the shape of what it was. It looked like a cloud, but it was tall, but all the details and edges were round. It was whatever was just on the river, ... the fog, whatever the heck it was in front of me. I could see darkness around the edges of it. So I knew it wasn't just a normal fog that would encompass more than a single spot on the road. I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I just couldn't wrap my mind around what it was I was looking at. I tried to focus on it so I could rationalize whatever it was, and why it looked like it did, and how it had moved directly in front of me. I sat there dumbfounded and terrified. I blinked, and it was just gone. That was just the start of things. The next time something happened, I was driving back to Montana, so opposite direction this time. I'm driving along listening to music, and I'm about to hit that same stretch of highway. I drive pretty fast, and I have made this drive so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed. There's never any other cars. There are animals to look out for, but I'm a professional. Anyways, I'm coming to that corner I mentioned, and the moment I round the bend, I see the back of what looks like a person, a man. He has a really large walking stick, and he's on the shoulder of the road. His back looks to be hunched over like someone older. My headlights land on his back, and it looks like he's wearing a brown kind of cloak made of hide or animal leather of some kind. I'm going way too fast for this road in general. But now I see a human, so I slow way down so I can veer over and give him more space. It's like 3:30 a.m. In thinking it's sulfur monoxide, weird that there's a person walking on the highway this late. Not to mention we were between 2 towns where the closest one was about 40 miles away, and there's 0 houses anywhere close. The profoundness of that thought didn't immediately cross my mind, but I obviously knew how strange it was to see someone walking alone, in the dark. I'm going about 30 now, to pass by him, and as I do, he turns to look at me, and all I see in his face are two dark, red eyes. I couldn't make out any features, nothing. I couldn't see a hand holding his walking stick, or any anatomy. All I could see were his eyes. I convinced myself that I imagined that, and it was too dark, and I was going too fast to have actually seen what I know I saw. I tried to shake it off, but it was already burned into my brain. 10 miles later, an animal I can only describe as a dog-like creature, but it was on two hind legs, who coincidentally had the same hunched posture. Crosses the road in front of me. It stops for just a split second, long enough for me to focus on it, and it turns to make eye contact with me. We're looking at each other. I'm startled to see the very same deep red eyes. My heart drops. I'm getting ready to slam on my brakes, so I don't hit this thing. I close my eyes for a split second, and when I open them, it is nowhere to be seen. I'm in full-blown panic mode. I make sure my doors are locked, all my windows are completely up. I turn my brights on and my light bar, and I drive as fast as freaking possible to get to the next town so I can be on the interstate. I don't know what it was I saw. I'm still questioning if any of it was real, or if my eyes or brain were playing tricks on me, but the next time it came up might have convinced me. The third time. It was so dark. I was driving back to Montana, and my tire pressure light comes on, starts blinking, dinging. I'm like, shoot, I got a flat. Guess where I am? Right next to the river. I am trying my best to not be a wimp. I forgot to mention, this whole stretch of highway, there's no cell service. It's like a dead zone. So I pull off to the side of the road. I know how to change my own tire. I'm very capable, and I have every intention of doing it. But it's very dark, and there's nothing around me. I sit there for a moment, and try to see if maybe, by the grace of God, I have service, and can call my insurance, or AAA, because let's face it, I'm 5 inches for 110 pounds in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch black night, at like 2:30 a.m. I was afraid. I was scared to get out of my car and even look. So I grabbed a flashlight and rolled down my window, stuck myself halfway out, and shined my light at my back and front tires. Because I could feel the direction my car had been pulling. I shine it at the front, and it looks fine. Shine it at the back. It's flat. As I'm cursing at my luck, I see a shadow. A tall, thick human-like shadow. It's quite a ways behind my car, running towards me. I drop the flashlight, and I assume it breaks because it turns off. I freeze. It's silent, dead silent. Except, I can hear feet hitting pavement. It's so fast. I couldn't move. I swear I stared in the direction of the noise into the darkness for a solid minute, until my brain finally starts working again, and tells my body to move. I scramble back in the window, hit the lock button, and roll up my window. My headlights are still on so I can see in front of me, and my taillights are the only light behind me. But there's no moon, and it's pitch black around me. I sit there for what seems like an eternity, peering into the darkness, straining to try to see anything. I couldn't see a thing. I decided to turn my car off and crack my window to see if I could hear anything. Worst decision ever. I cracked my window, and I could hear breathing. This was almost wet, heavy breathing, and it sounded like it wasn't but inches away from me, ... Like whatever it was had reached me, and they were crouching under my window. I rolled up my window in terror and went to start my car, and guess what? It wouldn't start. This car has never one time ever not started, ever. I literally felt such dread I was almost convinced I was going to die there. I'm crying and trying over and over to start the car, and it's not even trying. I swear I see fog from breath on my passenger window, and just trying to not look to my left, and boom. It starts. I drove 30 miles on a completely flat tire. destroyed my rim, and threw off the entire alignment on my car permanently. There was no freaking way I was getting out of that car to change that tire. Here is a kicker. I have a friend who lived in the same place in North Dakota for work a few years prior to me moving. He was also from Montana, and had made the same drive a million times like I had. One night, we were talking about commuting back and forth, and I had brought up Highway 16 and how I hated that portion of the drive. Before I can even tell him a vague why, he tells me, "I've seen some things, on that highway. I don't know what the hell it was, and I can't really explain it, and don't care to. But there's something wrong with that area." At this point I'm feeling that same ominous feeling, because I'm terrified but relieved that I wasn't the only one who experienced something weird. He asked me what it was that perturbed me so much about the area, so told him my story. I felt like he would understand, since he and I had the same kind lifestyle at the time with work and going home, so I told him all of it. He sat there silent until I finished. The look on his face made it seem like his world just ended. Not saying a word, he stood up and walked out of the room. I got up and followed him. I kept asking him what was wrong, but he didn't respond. We're outside and he goes out to his pickup. He doesn't start it. He digs through his glove box and pulls out this notebook. Mind you, this was the first time I said anything about my experiences, or that I ever had any. I was too confused, scared, and embarrassed to tell anyone about it. No one knew anything. I didn't want to give whatever it was power by talking about it, or letting it keep infecting my mind and my thoughts. "You are the so," he comes back in. He hands me the notebook and flips through a few pages while I'm holding it. He gets to a certain page and tells me to read it. I start reading. Someone explained to me why my friend, who used to make the same drive at night, is writing about a demonic old man walking on the shoulder of the road who, 10 miles down, changed into something completely different. One I love. He described it as a big black shadow dog, but he knew it was the man because it had the same red eyes. He has this written down, in a notebook, from 2 years prior. I'm crying. I'm literally sobbing. There's no possible way that what I was reading and what he had just heard me tell him could have been collaborated. How could I even act like none of it was real? Whatever it was, whatever that thing is, has to be real. How could the same thing have happened to both of us? Room 7 looked like any other motel room, It wasn't. The drive was supposed to be easy. I'd been feeling restless for a while, even though my travel blog was doing well. Traveling and writing had become repetitive, and I felt like I was just going through the motions. I missed the thrill of finding new places and the sense of adventure that made me start the blog in the first place. Lately, everything felt forced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. I remembered when every trip felt like a real adventure. Like the time I found a hidden village in the mountains, or met a kind stranger who showed me a secret spot only locals knew about. Those moments used to fill me with excitement, but now everything felt dull. I needed something to remind me why I loved traveling, like when I found that hidden waterfall in Oregon, or camped under the stars in the desert. I wanted that feeling of wonder again. Driving from Chicago to Denver was supposed to help clear my mind. But as the miles went by, everything looked the same. Flat farmland that stretched forever. The monotony of the endless road was almost hypnotic, and I still felt lost and uninspired. It was like I was running away from something, but didn't know what. And nothing I found along the way seemed to fill the emptiness. Then I found Council Bluffs. It felt different, almost like I was meant to stop there. The streets were unusually empty, and the buildings looked old and forgotten, like time had stopped. There was an eerie stillness in the air that made me shiver, like something was watching me from the shadows. Council Bluffs was on the border between Iowa and Nebraska, next to the Missouri River. It had a simple charm, a gas station, an old diner that looked like it was from the 1950s, and a small church. Something about it made me curious, like there was more beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. The motel I found was called the Silver Rest Inn. It was right off the main road, and looked old and run down. The paint was peeling, and the old neon sign flickered as the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. It was the kind of place people only used to sleep before moving on, and I figured it would be good enough for 3 nights. As I parked my car, I felt the temperature drop suddenly, and I thought I heard a faint creaking sound, like an old door swinging in the wind. It made me uneasy. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, and my stomach twisted with worry. I tried to ignore it, and grabbed my bag, heading into the front office. The room smelled like dust and something metallic that I couldn't quite place. Behind the counter was an old man with tired eyes. He nodded at me and spoke in a rough voice. "Need a room?" he asked. "Yeah, for 3 nights, please," I said, smiling even though I felt a bit uncomfortable. He hesitated for a moment, then handed me an old key with a wooden tag. "Room 7, he said. He paused, looking serious. "There are a few rules you need to follow." Raised an eyebrow. "Rules?" He nodded and pushed a small, yellowed piece of paper across the counter. The ink was smudged, like it had been written a long time ago. "It's nothing too serious," he said, but I could hear the unease in his voice. "Just things to keep in mind." I took the note and looked at it. It had 5 rules. Always close the bathroom door before sleeping, even if the light is off. Do not open the window after 10 p.m., even if it gets hot. If you hear knocking, check the peephole first. Do not open the door if no one is there. At midnight, place a cup of water on the nightstand and do not drink it. On your last night, leave a coin on the bedside table before you go to bed. A shiver ran through me. "Is this some kind of local superstition?" I asked, trying to sound amused, though my voice was shaky. The old man's smile faded, and he looked at me seriously. "Just follow the rules. Room 7, it's different." I wanted to ask more, but the way he looked at me made me stop. Instead, I nodded and took the key and the note. "Okay, I'll follow them," I said, trying to sound casual. The room was at the far end of the motel, and the door looked worn from years of use. I turned the key in the lock, and the door opened with a heavy click. The room was what I expected: a bed, with an old floral bedspread, a small wooden table, and a bathroom with a chipped mirror. The air was a bit stale, so I walked over to the window and pulled the curtains aside to let in some fresh air. Outside, everything was quiet, with only the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. I looked at the note again, feeling a strange sense of worry. It was just a room, I told myself. I had stayed in plenty of rooms like this. But I couldn't shake the look in the old man's eyes. It was like he was warning me. The air felt heavy, and I could swear I heard a faint rustle, like something moving in the shadows, making my skin prickle. The first night, I ignored the rules. I left the bathroom door slightly open, even though I felt a shiver telling me I shouldn't. What harm could it cause? I got ready for bed, feeling exhausted from the long drive. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and as I lay there, I couldn't help but think about the strange rules. The unease lingered, making it hard to fully relax. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. I woke up at 3 a.m. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. The air was damp, like just before a storm. I looked at the bathroom, and my heart skipped a beat. The door, which I had left partly open, was now wide open. The darkness inside seemed to move, almost like it was alive. My heart started to race, and then I heard it ate a deep growl coming from the bathroom, like an animal in pain. Fear took over, and I forced myself to move. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the floor cold beneath my feet. I crept toward the bathroom, my heart pounding in my ears. The growl stopped as soon as I touched the door, and I quickly pushed it shut, locking it. I stood there, breathing hard, waiting for any other sound. But the room was silent again, and slowly, the damp feeling in the air went away. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers tightly around me, keeping my eyes on the bathroom door until I finally fell asleep. My dreams were uneasy, filled with fleeting images of shadows moving across the walls and whispering voices I couldn't understand. Every time I thought I was about to make out the words, I would wake up in a sweat, only to find the room quiet and still. The next morning, I tried to shake off the fear from the night before. Maybe I hadn't closed the door properly, and the strange growl could have just been the wind or old pipes. I didn't want to think too much about it, so I spent the day exploring Council Bluffs. I took pictures of the Union Pacific Railroad Museum, the old squirrel cage jail, and the Missouri River. The town was quiet and had a sort of eerie beauty to it. People were polite but not very friendly, and they seemed to look at me strangely when I mentioned the motel. "You're staying at the Silver Rest?" and the waitress at the diner asked, her smile fading. "Yeah," I said, trying to act normal. "Why? Is there something I should know?" She hesitated, then looked around like she wanted to make sure no one else heard. "Just, follow the rules," she said quietly. "People who don't, well, they are never found again." A shiver ran through me. Something about the way she said it made me feel like I was already in danger. Like there was some dark secret everyone in the town knew but wouldn't share with outsiders. That night, back in room 7, I made sure to follow the first rule. I closed the bathroom door firmly before getting into bed. I looked over the list again, my eyes lingering on the second rule. Do not open the window after 10 p.m., even if it gets hot. The room felt stuffy. The air conditioner rattled, but it wasn't doing much to cool the room. By 11 p.m., I was sweating, and my shirt stuck to my skin. I knew what the note said, but no matter how hard I tried, I felt like I couldn't breathe, like something was very wrong with my throat. I walked over to the window and opened it, letting the cool night air in. The breeze felt amazing, and I sighed with relief. But then I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside the door. Slow and deliberate. My whole body tensed up. The footsteps got louder, and then there was a soft knock at the door. Then another, louder, this time, like whoever it was wanted to be let in. My heart pounded as I crept towards the door, my eyes on the peephole. I looked through the peephole, but there was nothing. Just darkness. The knocking continued, getting louder and louder, echoing in the small room. I backed away, my gaze darting to the open window. The curtains moved with the breeze, and I rushed over to close the window. As soon as it was shut, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was almost scarier than the knocking. My hands were shaking, and I stood there, trying to make sense of it. There had been no one there, but the knocking and footsteps were real. I rushed to close the window, but it was like something invisible was pushing against it, making it almost impossible to move. I struggled with all my strength, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until finally, with a surge of effort, I managed to close it. Suddenly, the bathroom door burst open, and what seemed like an obscure creature on 4 legs lunged out. It looked like a twisted, shadowy animal. Its body was long and skeletal, with jagged, bony legs that ended in sharp, claw-like points. Its face was featureless, a black void that seemed to absorb the light around it. My heart stopped as it came at me, and I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. But then, nothing. The sudden silence was deafening, as if the entire room had been swallowed by emptiness. I felt a strange, hollow stillness, like the world itself had paused. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone, as if it had never been there. I collapsed onto the bed, my heart pounding painfully in my chest. I felt like I was losing my mind. I picked up the note again, and the words seemed even more important now. These weren't just silly superstitions, they were rules meant to keep me safe from forces beyond my comprehension. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every small sound seemed amplified, the creak of the bed, the rustle of the curtains. I kept my eyes fixed on the bathroom door, half expecting it to swing open again. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with dark figures standing at the edge of my bed, their faces hidden, their whispers growing louder, until I woke up, drenched in sweat. By the third night, I was terrified. I knew there was something in room 7, something dangerous. I had to follow every rule exactly. I closed the bathroom door, kept the window shut, and made sure to listen carefully before answering any knocks. But there was one rule: I had forgotten the cup of water on the nightstand. It was past midnight when I remembered. My heart started to pound as I rushed to fill a cup of water from the bathroom sink and set it on the nightstand. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm myself. The room felt different, like the walls were pressing in on me, the shadows growing darker and more defined. I could feel the weight of something unseen watching me. When I finally fell asleep, my dreams were dark and unsettling. I was back in the motel room, but everything felt wrong. The walls seemed to move, expanding and contracting like they were breathing, and shadows gathered in the corners, whispering. Figures stood at the edge of the bed, hidden by darkness. I tried to move, but I felt like something was holding me down, a heavy pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. The room was completely dark, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Long, slender handprints on the outside of the window. A chill went through me, and then I felt a hated cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, but I felt like I was being watched. I looked at the cup of water on the nightstand. It was empty. My stomach sank. I must have drunk it in my sleep, breaking another rule. The growl returned, deep and echoing around the room. The shadows gathered again, twisting and shifting into shapes that almost looked like people. My breath caught in my throat, and I shut my eyes, trying to make it all go away. I couldn't help but think, this can't be real. Please, let it stop. I can't take this anymore. The fear was overwhelming, and I felt a desperation I had never known before. The growling got louder, coming from everywhere at once, a horrible guttural sound that seemed to seep into my very bones. When I opened my eyes, the figures were there, surrounding the bed, their faces hidden, their dark hands reaching towards me. They were closer now, and I could see the outlines of their forms. The way their fingers seemed to stretch and curl unnaturally. The figures paused, their hands hovering over me. The shadows seemed to ripple, as if they were deciding what to do. Then, slowly, they began to fade away, dissolving into the darkness. The growling got quieter, until the room was silent again. The air was still and cold, and I lay there, shaking, tears in my eyes. I knew I couldn't stay another night if I did. I was certain that whatever lurked in the shadows would consume me entirely. The feeling of dread was overwhelming, and every instinct in my body screamed that I was in immediate danger, that the next encounter would be my last. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. After the encounter with the creature, my instinct was to run. I grabbed my things and rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, every step echoing in the silence of the empty motel. I needed to leave right now. My hands were trembling, and the fear clawed at my chest, making it hard to think clearly. But when I reached the exit, the door wouldn't budge. I twisted the handle again and again, my panic growing with each failed attempt. It was locked, as if it hadn't been used in years. The windows were boarded up, and the dim light filtering through made everything look even more hopeless. I pounded on the door, my breath coming in short gasps. Panic surged through me, and I turned to see the old man standing behind the front desk, watching me with those tired, emotionless eyes. "I need to leave," I said, my voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "Let me out, please." The old man shook his head slowly, almost sadly. "You can't leave until you've stayed the full nights you paid for," he said, his voice almost apologetic, but there was something cold in his tone, something that made my stomach twist even more. I felt the walls of the room closing in on me, the heavy silence pressing down, and I wanted to scream. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I realized then that I was trapped. There was no way out until I faced the final night, until I followed every rule perfectly. My eyes darted around the lobby, searching for another exit, a back door, anything that could save me from returning to that cursed room. But there was nothing. The old man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with that hollow gaze. I took a step back, my body trembling, and knew I had no choice. My heart sank as I turned and slowly walked back down the hallway. Every step felt heavier, like I was walking toward my doom. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly, the dim lights flickering above me. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had to do this. I had no choice but to return to room 7. On the final night, I knew I had to follow every rule perfectly. If I wanted to leave alive, I closed the bathroom door, kept the window shut, put the cup of water on the nightstand, and left a coin on the bedside table. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, the silence in the room almost unbearable. My body was tense, every muscle tight, as I listened for the first sign of trouble. The air felt thick, as if it was weighing me down, and every sound seemed amplified in the deafening stillness. At midnight, the knocking started again. It was soft at first, then got louder and more demanding. Each knock seemed to resonate deep in my bones, vibrating through the bed frame. The whispers followed, voices outside the window, growing in number until it sounded like a crowd murmuring just beyond the thin glass. Shadows moved beyond the glass, forming shapes that twisted and writhed. I kept my eyes on the coin, focusing on it as my only connection to reality, trying to block out the chaos around me. The room felt like it was getting darker, the pressure in the air building, until I thought I would scream. My chest felt tight, and it was hard to breathe, like the very air was being sucked out of the room. I felt the mattress dip slightly, as if something had climbed onto the bed. My heart raced, and I clenched my teeth to keep from crying out. I could feel an unnatural coldness spreading from the foot of the bed, moving closer, inch by inch. My entire body was paralyzed with fear, my muscles locked in place as I tried to keep my focus on the coin. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could swear I heard my name being called, mixed in with the voices. Then, slowly, the darkness began to lift. The whispers got quieter, the knocking stopped, and the shadows faded away. The air felt lighter, and the pressure on my chest slowly began to release. A faint light started to filter through the curtains, and I realized that dawn was breaking. The sense of relief was overwhelming. I let out a shaky breath, and felt tears welling up in my eyes. I had made it. I had survived the final night. My entire body was trembling, but I managed to get out of bed and gather my things. The rules had been followed, and I could feel that whatever haunted room 7 was letting me go. I made my way to the front desk. The old man was there, watching me as I approached. He looked tired, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes as well. "You followed the rules," he said quietly, nodding as I handed him the key. I nodded back, my voice too shaky to speak. I could barely believe that I was finally leaving. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, stepping into the early morning light. The fresh air hit my face, and I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in days. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the Silver Reston. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I watched the old motel grow smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared from view. I knew, deep down, that I would never return to that place. Room 7 was still there, waiting for the next person who wouldn't listen to the warnings.